For most people on a fertility journey, especially women, the absence of their baby lives in their body like a physical ache that just kind of lurks in their body beneath the surface at all times. And every month that passes without a positive test, or worse, every pregnancy that doesn't stick, is a grief that most people around you don't fully understand. Your friends and family don't really know what to say. People keep asking you when you're going to have a baby, and you just feel the heat moving into your neck and a lump in your throat every time someone brings up the subject. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the two of you can kind of start to feel the distance growing between you without even knowing exactly how it got there. Nobody warned you about that part of the fertility journey. Nobody told you that the dream of having a family and the ache and the grief of it not coming in the timing you'd hoped for could just kind of quietly and slowly start to create space between the two of you. That the journey that you thought would unite you could start to feel like the thing that was pulling you apart. That the grief of it carried month after month, mostly in silence, mostly alone, could do things to a relationship that love alone can't fix. But here's what I also know, and I want you to hold on to this idea as we get into this episode. This season, as hard as it is, might actually be one of the greatest invitations you will ever receive. And that invitation is to grow as an individual and together as a couple, to heal wounds from the past that this pressure has a way of bubbling to the surface, to learn more about each other and how to love and to support each other based on your individual needs, because we're all different, to become the most whole, grounded, present version of yourselves, not just for each other, but for the family and the future that you're building together. Because I truly believe, and this is why I do this work, that the way we change the energetic frequency of the entire world is by changing who we are being in it and creating healthy, happy, thriving families to be part of this world. And that starts with two emotionally and physically healthy, happy, thriving parents. And here's the hard truth that none of us like to face. Sometimes the reality of life is that the things we want most don't come in the timing we'd hoped for. And when we become so attached to the outcome that the wanting and the focus on what's missing becomes the whole story, we end up creating the exact stuck state in our nervous system that makes it harder for the body to actually do what we're asking it to do. Make a baby, right? The stress of forcing an outcome slows down the very thing that we're trying to make happen. So what if surrendering to the timing, trusting that what is meant for you is already on its way, isn't actually giving up? What if it is actually the most powerful thing you can do for your body, for your nervous system, and for your relationship? That's what this episode is about. Not fear, not forcing, not urgency, but the understanding that this journey, navigated the right way, can make you and your relationship stronger than it has ever been. And if you've been feeling like the weight of this journey has been just quietly coming between you and your partner, stick around with me, because by the end of this episode, you are going to have some real practical tools, not just to protect your relationship through this, but to come out of it stronger than you went in. Before we jump into today's episode, if you've been following along and you're not yet subscribed, can you do me a huge favor and do that right now? When you're subscribed and you hit that bell icon, not only are you going to be notified when I drop new episodes, but you're also going to help me reach more people who are looking for my content. And I really, really do appreciate that. If you're new here, my name is Tamy Anderson, and I have the best job in the whole world. I help couples trying to conceive make their babies. I'm at the intersection of functional health, mindset, and nervous system rewiring, which is the full picture that you actually need and that almost nobody else in this space is giving you. All right, let's get into it. Before we dive fully in though, I want to warn you that if you're hearing some grunting in the background that kind of sounds like a pot-bellied pig, That's my little dog, Maple. She's sitting right here next to me. Okay, so the fertility journey is rough on a relationship. And after dozens of raw conversations with couples, most people are walking through this feeling sad and disconnected and often like their relationship is falling apart. The most intimate part of your life together kind of becomes medicalized, right? It becomes clinical. Sex becomes scheduled and goal-oriented. It becomes performance on demand, which for a woman is hard because that's just simply not how our bodies work. And even for a man whose body is more ready on demand, the pressure of it being outcome driven can feel really, really stressful because it's no longer an expression of desire and connection and just the pleasure of it, right? And when that shift happens, when the bedroom starts to feel like a clinical protocol rather than a sanctuary, something in the intimacy of the relationship quietly begins to die. Conversation becomes more narrow. And before the fertility journey, you talked about everything, right? Your dreams, your plans, your future, what you want to see and do together and build together. You laughed and just enjoyed lighthearted banter and flirting and connection. And now almost every single conversation somehow circles back to the same thing: the cycle, the timing, the appointment, the result, the next step, the 2-week wait, the devastating news that it didn't work once again, right? The relationship stops being about who you are together and starts being entirely about what you're trying to produce. And then there's the emotional asymmetry. In most couples that are navigating this journey, the woman's the one carrying significantly more of the emotional weight of it, right? She's the one researching at 2 a.m. She's the one whose body is being poked and prodded and monitored. She's the one absorbing the hormonal impact of every intervention that you try if you're doing, medical interventions. The one who's grieving every month in a way that he might empathize with, but just doesn't fully understand. Because for her, every cycle that doesn't result in a pregnancy is a loss. A real, tangible loss. And he may love her deeply and still not grasp the full weight of what she's experiencing. So it can be an especially isolating and lonely journey for her. That gap between what she's carrying emotionally and physically and what he understands her to be carrying, it can create a distance. Right? Even when nobody intends for that to happen. And over time, that distance becomes the thing that is just quietly breaking the relationship. Not the fertility journey itself, the disconnection that slowly sneaks in along the way. Now, here's something that might actually surprise you. The fertility journey isn't actually what created these problems. And I know that feels counterintuitive because when you're living it, it really does feel like the trying to conceive journey is the thing that's changed everything in the relationship. That your relationship was totally fine before all of this, right? But here's something that I've seen in my work with couples over and over again. The emotional strain of the fertility journey surfaces tender spots in the relationship, and it just amplifies old unhealed wounds that each person carries into the relationship. It amplifies the gap between what she needs and what he knows how to give, right? It amplifies patterns each of them brought into the relationship from the families that they grew up in. Gabor Mate, if you're not familiar with him, his work is around the connection between emotional experiences and a person's physical health. He talks about how our earliest relationships, the ones we had with our caregivers before we even had language for what was happening, create the template for every intimate relationship we have as adults. The way we were loved or not loved, the way our needs were met or not met, the way we learned to attach or to protect ourselves from attachment. All of that comes with us into our relationships. And what the fertility journey does with all of its pressure and all of its grief is activate those old patterns. It surfaces the limiting beliefs that we each brought into the relationship. Beliefs that we picked up sometime during our early childhood, adopted from our caregivers that adopted them from their caregivers. Beliefs we've never stopped to question the validity of. the childhood wounds that were never healed. His fear of not being enough gets louder for him because men want to fix things, and not being able to fix it can feel unbearable for a man. A woman's need to feel supported and seen gets more acute during this time. And if neither of them has the tools or the self-awareness to recognize what's happening, if they don't understand that what's being triggered is not really about the fertility journey, but something much older and much deeper, they'll turn toward each other in the wrong way, or they'll turn away from each other entirely. And the relationship fractures because the wounds underneath it had never been healed. So what do you do with that? You start building the habit of turning toward each other before the hard moments arrive. I want to share with you a really beautiful practice that you and your partner can adopt right now and forever. This is one that I heard about from a couple that is in their late 80s, and they had been married for well over 50 years. They shared a habit that they committed to on their wedding day, which was holding hands while lying beside each other and expressing gratitude for the other person every morning when they woke up and every night as the last thing they did before falling asleep. And they never missed a single night in their entire marriage, even when they were really ticked off at each other. It's one really simple and one tiny habit that can keep your marriage thriving through every hard chapter. Because the reality is, the fertility journey isn't going to be the only hard chapter that you ever face in a lifetime together. So I'm going to get a little personal here. If you've listened to some of my other episodes, you probably already know that I spent over 20 years living with chronic illness. And part of that I've never talked about here before is that while I was sick, I was also in a marriage where I felt really alone and misunderstood. And honestly, like I was a burden because of my health issues. And it wasn't because my husband didn't love me. I know he loved me in the best way he knew how. But he had his own unhealed wound, his own armor and his own limitations in what he was able to give me emotionally. And honestly, I had mine. I was carrying my own really significant unhealed wounds from a childhood that hadn't exactly set me up with a great template for feeling worthy of being loved and supported. And I'll just leave it at that for now because that's another entire episode on its own. But when I was really struggling with my health and when I was at my lowest moments, desperately searching for solutions and not able to participate fully in the fun family stuff that everybody else was doing, he would say, "Why do you always have to be so sick all the time?" And I know now, looking back, that he was really doing the best he could. Because being married to someone with chronic health issues is fucking hard. It sucks. The truth is that chronic illness doesn't just affect the person that's struggling with it. The entire family suffers. But man, I remember the shame and the guilt I felt every single time he said that. It made me feel so small, like such a burden, like he believed I was trying to be sick, that it was something that I wanted, and that it was causing him inconvenience. And I just felt so incredibly lonely and misunderstood. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because if you're a woman who's ever been made to feel by your partner, the person who's supposed to have your back and love you the most, like your struggles are an inconvenience, you know exactly what those words do inside a body. They don't just hurt, they create shame. They make you question whether your experience is even real or if it's just all in your mind. They make you feel like a burden rather than a beloved. They make you want to shrink and to apologize for your own suffering for inconveniencing them, right? And this is the part that directly affects the fertility conversation. They make you guarded and closed up. They make you kind of averse to intimacy, not because you don't love your partner, but because intimacy requires a level of safety and openness that can't exist when you feel unseen and unsupported by the person you're being intimate with. The body isn't going to be receptive and open to someone it doesn't feel emotionally safe with. That's the bottom line. So I want to be clear here that I know that my late husband was doing the very best he could with what he had to work with, right? We all are. But his lack of empathy, which came directly, by the way, from his own unhealed wounds, from growing up in a home where his own emotional needs weren't met, that had real consequences for our relationship and for my body. And I share that because I know what I lived isn't unique, because I see versions of it in almost every couple that I work with. Brene Brown says that empathy is not about fixing. It's not about offering solutions or silver linings. It's about climbing down into the hole with someone and saying, I see you in here and I'm not leaving. That is what she needs from you during this time. Not answers, not solutions, not just relax, babe. Just, I see you. Let me hold you. I'm not going anywhere. This is hard and you do not have to pretend otherwise with me because I'm in this with you. That single shift from problem solver to just compassionate, empathetic witness changes the entire nervous system environment that she's living in. And as I talked about in the last 2 episodes, that nervous system environment is not separate from her fertility. It is central and essential to it. So I want to offer you a reframe today. And this is the one that I think has the power to change everything if you're open to receiving it. What if the fertility journey is not something that is happening to your relationship? What if it is happening for your relationship? I know that might sound cliche, but I want you to stay with me. Every difficult season in a relationship is an invitation to go deeper than the surface, to look at the patterns and the limiting beliefs that have been running in the background, to heal the things that we're always going to need healing eventually anyway, and to do it together rather than letting them quietly erode the foundation of what you're building. The couples who come through this journey, not just with their relationships intact, but genuinely stronger and thriving, are those who use the pressure as information, who are intentional about loving each other the way they each need to be loved, to lean in with empathy, who choose to listen to understand, not to fix and not to defend, who learn to pause before responding, to hold each other and co-regulate, who learn that their individual personal growth is an ongoing necessity and an investment in their relationship and their family. And that is not something you do passively. It is an active choice that you make every single day. And it starts with the willingness to see each other, to really, really see each other in the middle of the hard thing. Not just as partners in a project called Let's Have a Baby, but as 2 human beings who chose each other, who have histories and wounds and dreams and fears, who are doing the best they can with what they have, and who deserve to be witnessed in their full humanity by the person who knows them best. Neville Goddard was a spiritual teacher in the mid-1900s, and he was teaching decades before neuroscience would come along and start proving what he already knew. His work centered around one core idea, that your imagination is the most powerful creative force that you have available to you. That the reality that you experience on the outside in your material world is always going to be a reflection of the assumptions that you are holding on the inside. And that the way to change what shows up in your life is not to chase it harder, but to change what you are assuming to be true. And this comes down to your beliefs. So he taught this idea of living from the end. Basically, that instead of treating your desired outcome as something that you are striving toward, something that's sort of out there in the future that you don't yet have, that you're chasing, you inhabit that now. Because anytime you're chasing something, it keeps moving further away, right? So instead, you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. You live, you think, you speak, you act and move as the version of yourself for whom that thing is already true. And this is not as pretense, it's not a performance, but as a genuine shift in your internal state of being. in what you are assuming, what you are expecting, the energy that you are radiating out into the world. I want to give you an example of this from my own life, because I've experienced this idea of living from the end, not just in theory, but in my own lived reality. When I hit my true emotional rock bottom with my health, for months, I was laying awake for hours every single night, crying and catastrophizing my future. I was literally using the creative power of my imagination against myself, making movies in my mind of my little boys standing in front of my casket at my funeral, walking across their high school graduation stages with no mom sitting in the audience, no mom at their weddings, no grandma when their babies were born. You know, throughout my health journey, I had been to every doctor, every practitioner. I'd run every test, done everything I had been told to the letter, perfectly, and I only got sicker. And one day when I was in the thick of my grief, in my emotional rock bottom, I was wandering through a bookstore and a book on a display table caught my eye. It was called Change Your Mind and Your Life Will Follow by Karen Casey. And for some reason, even though I wasn't really into personal growth at the time, I bought the book and I went home and started reading it immediately. And honestly, I think of wandering through that bookstore and that one little book from an author I'd never heard of before catching my eye as one of the biggest synchronicities and best blessings of my entire life. That little book is a significant part of the reason I'm sitting here today recording this episode for you. She essentially taught this live from the end concept. And I realized that I had been using the creative power of my imagination against myself. So instead of using it intelligently, I used it to catastrophize anything and everything in my life and to predict a future of myself that was anything except what I actually wanted. So I decided to try an experiment. I figured if I could use my imagination to create a terrible future, maybe I could also use it to create the one I actually wanted. And if nothing else, at least I wouldn't be feeling so internally anxiety-ridden all the time, right? So at bedtime, I started practicing creating movies in my mind that were the opposite of the movies that I'd been making. And little by little, my life started to change, like literal magic. The right people and resources and information that I needed to actually heal my body from the inside out practically fell in my lap. It was like God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, just threw them at me. And I simply just started taking trusting action on what I learned I needed to do to heal. And I just started living as though I was already the perfectly healthy, happy version of myself. I didn't fret over little setbacks. Or when I started to, I redirected myself. I stopped monitoring my symptoms like a hawk, and I chose to wake up every single day and put a smile on my face and choose gratitude for the day. And I'm telling you that within 6 months of reading that little book, after more than 20 years of chronic illness, I was completely free from every health symptom I had been struggling with. And a big part of what was happening as I was learning to live from the end is that I was just creating safety in my nervous system, which created the internal environment in which everything that I had been doing to heal, the diet, the supplements, the lifestyle changes, could actually work. My nervous system had to feel safe first. And the imagination was the tool that created that safety. And I want to apply this idea specifically to what happens to couples during the fertility journey, because one of the most insidious things that happens to couples is they get trapped in the waiting room of their own life. They stop making plans, because what's the point of making plans if everything's about to change, right? They stop booking vacations because she might be pregnant then. They stop talking about the future they want to build together because every conversation about the future has the fertility journey sitting in the middle of it like an uninvited guest that won't leave. They put their relationship and essentially their lives on hold, waiting for the result, waiting for the thing that will finally let you exhale and start actually living again. And here's what that waiting costs you. When you are focused on what you don't have, when the absence of the baby is the primary lens through which you are experiencing your life and your relationship, you are living in lack. And lack, like guilt and shame and anger and worry, puts you in a low vibrational state. And I talked about this concept in a previous episode, which I'll link up at the end of this one. A psychiatrist and consciousness researcher by the name of David Hawkins spent decades of his career studying human emotional states, and he created what he called a map of consciousness. And essentially, this map of consciousness is a scale of vibrational and emotional frequencies. States on this scale that are below 200, things like shame, guilt, grief, fear, anger, those are states where the body simply can't heal. It's not accessible because these are the low frequency, contracted, low energy states. This is what I call your stuck state. And this is when you're in the sympathetic fight or flight state of your nervous system. And it is the exact opposite of the open and regulated, safe state in which healing can actually happen and in which the things you want are actually able to reach you. So Neville Goddard would say, and I would say right alongside him, that the energy of waiting and wanting and not yet having is actively working against the outcome you're trying to create. Not because God or the universe is punishing you for something bad you did in the past or for being impatient, but because when you're living in that stuck state of lack and longing, your body is in a low-grade state of chronic threat. And we've talked at length in previous episodes about what chronic threat does to hormones, to ovulation, to the body's capacity to conceive. The stress of forcing an outcome slows down the very thing you're trying to make happen. And there are only two states of being. I refer to them as stuck and unstoppable. And when you're living from the end, focusing on what you already have and moving through your life as though what you want is already on its way, you generate good feeling emotional states that put you in your unstoppable state. And this is the state that you're in when you're regulated, where the body's ability to heal and, yes, to conceive is significantly increased. I'm sure you've probably heard stories about couples who tried for years and then they finally gave up and decided it just wasn't in their cards. They stopped trying. And suddenly, within a couple months, she's pregnant. And that's not coincidence. It's not because their luck just suddenly changed. It's what happens when the nervous system finally exhales. It's because they surrendered. They stopped trying to force an outcome and started living again, right? And when that happened, the baby they'd been trying to force into their lives came easily, just like my healing did. I love this quote from the Ancient One in the Doctor Strange movie. You cannot beat a river into submission. You have to surrender to its current and use its power as your own. When you stop trying to control the outcome, you become truly free. And that freedom, that genuine, embodied nervous system level freedom, is exactly the internal environment in which the thing you want most becomes possible. So the antidote, practically, physiologically, energetically, is to stop living in the waiting room. Book the trip. Plan the vacation you've been putting off because you might be pregnant by then. Go to the concert, have the dinner party, make plans for next summer as though you already know everything you want is on its way, because it is. Spend a Saturday doing something you both love that has absolutely nothing to do with fertility, conception, appointments, or the 2-week wait. Remember who you were together before this became the whole story. Remember that you are two people who chose each other, and that the choosing is worth celebrating right now, right? Not just when the result arrives. This is not bypassing the journey. It's not pretending that your grief isn't real. The grief is very real, and it deserves to be felt. But there is a difference between feeling your grief and living inside it as your permanent address. One is human and healthy. The other is a nervous system state that keeps you stuck. So when you stop trying to control the outcome, you become truly free and unstoppable. Live from the end. Assume it's already on its way. And in the meantime, live together fully right now. So I want to close with this. The relationship that you are building right now, the way you are choosing to show up for each other in this season, is the foundation of the family that you're trying to create. Not the protocols or the labs or the supplements, the relationship. The nervous system environment that you are co-creating together every single day. The way he makes her feel seen or unseen. The way she feels safe or alone. The way they either turn toward each other or under pressure, let the pressure push them apart. That foundation matters, not just for the fertility outcome, though, obviously it matters for that too. It matters for the parents you're going to be together as a team, for the home that your child is going to grow up in, for the marriage that will either thrive or quietly collapse under the weight of new parenthood if the cracks were never addressed. Wayne Dyer, one of my greatest mentors, said, "You cannot be lonely if you like the person you're alone with." And I would extend that to say you cannot build a joyful family on a foundation where two people have forgotten how to genuinely like each other. The work of remembering, of choosing each other actively, of seeing each other with fresh eyes, of refusing to let the difficulty of this season become the whole definition of your relationship, that is not separate from the fertility work. That is the fertility work. The body conceives in safety, and safety is what you build together. So I hope this one hit home for you today. It's wisdom gained through hundreds of coaching calls and lived experience in 20 years of marriage that honestly I wish I'd had a whole lot sooner. If you recognized yourself or your relationship patterns in anything that I shared in this episode, do me a favor and drop a comment if you're watching on YouTube, and let's continue this conversation. I love hearing what landed for you in each of my episodes. If you're ready to look at the full picture in all of this with both of you fully in it together, and if this feels like the right next step, applications for the Partner Discovery Call are open. Both of you need to be on that call, and the link for that is in the description down below. I also have some additional resources linked down there, lots of different stuff, and I have a free masterclass in the works specifically for couples navigating this journey together, and I'll let you know when that's live in future episodes, and I'll also add the link down below when it's ready as well on this episode. So depending on when you're watching or listening, it might already be waiting for you. And hey, do me a favor and share this episode. If you know a couple who's in the middle of this, who's feeling the strain and doesn't know how to talk about it, send it to them. It just might be the conversation that opens the door for them. And hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, along with the bell icon so that you'll be notified when I drop new episodes. And if you're listening in on one of the audio platforms, do me a favor and leave me a rating and review. It only takes a couple minutes, and it makes a huge difference in helping this show find the people who need it the most. I love you, I mean it, and I'll see you in the next episode.